Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is such a proud moment for me to stand here in front of you on behalf of Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company Masdar to extend a warm welcome to you all to the third edition of our annual Green Hydrogen Summit here and in Abu Dhabi at the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week 2025 with an overarching theme, the nexus to the next, supercharging sustainable progress. We all unite here in Abu Dhabi into our strong belief that green hydrogen is inevitable, it's happening, and it will be the next step of the energy system transformation. We want to capitalize on the previous forums and platform, joining forces together with the support of our partners, Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, and we thank His Excellency for the enlightening intervention and for the continuous support at federal level, in addition, of course, to Abu Dhabi Department of Energy and our partners whom we work with diligently, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, the Emirates Global Aluminum, Emirates Steel, Fertiglobe, and BEEAH. We all work together into deepening our collaboration, strengthening our joint efforts together to open new frontiers of investment opportunities, of transforming and exchanging knowledge collaboratively, of deploying of sustainable financial models, and very importantly, to harmonize the global standards into making green hydrogen the reality of the future. This is only to set the scene for the very interesting panel that we are going to witness today. I encourage you all to participate. I want to once again thank His Excellency Suhail Mohammad Al-Mazrou'i for the intervention, and I would like to make a quick remark at the closing that similar to the renewable energy, when we started back in the days, we inaugurated our 10 megawatt solar PV plant in Masdar city with a cost that exceeded $40 per kilowatt hour back in 2009. And only 9 years after, we started developing Al Dhafra PV plant with a world record-breaking cost below $1.3 per kilowatt hour. We are doing the same, and we at Masdar started with interesting pilot projects, one of which is with Emirates Steel that is currently in operation for a few months. It was inaugurated last year. I invite you all with the coordination with Emirates Steel to visit that plant, in addition also to our hydrogen fueling station for automotive section, for mobility section that is in Masdar city. I wish you all a fruitful, engaging, and pleasant Green Hydrogen Summit this year. Thank you all.
Thank you very much indeed to Mr. El-Ramahi for providing the perfect segue, ladies and gentlemen, to our panel discussion. For now, it is my great pleasure to invite to the stage Alex Campbell, Director of Policy and Partnerships at the Long Duration Energy Storage Council, and his esteemed panelists, whom he'll introduce to you.
At BEEAH, we shape a sustainable future across the region. We keep cities clean, paving the way for a zero-waste future through waste management and recycling, and drive renewable energy through converting waste into power, turning landfills into solar hubs, innovating green hydrogen solutions. We advance industries with next-gen technologies, digitalizing recyclables trading, on-demand logistics, automating track and trace, renewable energy-powered digital infrastructure. We're bringing world-class healthcare closer to home.
I thought I heard this.
And reimagining cities with iconic landmarks and thriving districts for communities.
Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you heard, my name is Alex Campbell. I'm the Director of Policy and Partnerships at the Long Duration Energy Storage Council, LDES Council for short. We're an industry association. We have 60 plus members all around the world, all dedicated to deploying LDES. That's the ability to discharge energy continuously for 8 hours or more, all in support of the energy transition. We're not here to hear about me. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists. Unfortunately, one of our panelists has been delayed on the way in, so unfortunately it's just going to be 3 of us, but that's even more of an opportunity to talk. So from my left, your right, we've got Suzanne Gaboury, Director General for Private Sector Operations at the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Rahma Alshamsi, Director of Portfolio and Ventures at BEEAH Group, and Dr. Laurent Antoni, Executive Director of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, which is almost as long a name as the Long Duration Energy Storage Council. So I'll ask each of our panelists to say a little bit about their organization when we go to them on the questions, so rather than me going through all of it right up front. So to start with, we'll go to Laurent, if that's okay. And the first question is really about the big picture of international engagement and how governments can work together with the private sector to create those standards and frameworks. So how can governments effectively coordinate national green hydrogen strategies with those international efforts to promote cross-border trade, harmonization, and so on? Laurent.
Thank you, Alex, for the question. In fact, as you may know, that today more than 100 countries have either a national strategy or a national roadmap. And all these strategies or roadmaps are based on unique national circumstances. So you may imagine not all are the same. So this is a quite good topic. How can we align? And I would say, but there is one common word, is how can we decarbonize our economies? Or even in some regions, defossilize our economies? And to do so, how to align? One main point is to really support international collaboration and, most importantly, international coordination. And this is done through existing or new initiatives. And of course, you may also see that more and more on the G7, G20, BRICS summits, hydrogen is on the agenda. But I would like to mention, I would say, more 5 specific hydrogen initiatives. The first one, IPHE, I am the executive director, is a government-to-government partnership created 22 years ago to really ensure to have the multilateral discussion between governments on how to develop a hydrogen economy. And the topics are on certification, on regulation, on trade rules, but also on skills developments for the economy, to develop a hydrogen economy and industry. And UAE is one of the members of IPHE since several years. As a second point, I would say we had a historical moment for hydrogen 2 years ago at COP28, under this UAE presidency, where we had this declaration of intent that many countries, almost 40 countries, have signed this declaration of intent to collaborate to see how we can move forward to mutual recognition of certification schemes. And certification of hydrogen is key to decrease uncertainties, to ensure that everyone agrees on what does renewable and low carbon hydrogen mean. And so we need to discuss together between governments. And after this COP28 declaration, of course, we would encourage any new countries interested in joining this declaration to sign, and we try to follow up this declaration by implementing all the different recommendations through the Hydrogen Breakthrough Agenda. And this has been created at COP26, and this is a platform to try to gather all international initiatives like IEA, ARENA, UNIDO, UNECE, but the Hydrogen Council, IPHE, WTO or the World Bank on really specific priorities. And here we tried, and at COP29 we have proposed some recommendations on how to implement this declaration of intent, and also we have proposed a timeline to develop, I would say, really international trade. And this is my last point regarding how to develop international trade. Also, 2 years ago, it has been created this International Hydrogen Trade Forum, and UAE was one of the co-chair with the Netherlands, and now from this year, the co-chair is Brazil, but UAE remains really involved in this International Hydrogen Trade Forum, and this is quite important in the sense that it is a public-private partnership. So, of course, we need stable regulations, but as mentioned by the Excellency before, we also, governments need to collaborate with industry in order to ensure that it will really happen. And this International Hydrogen Trade Forum is really here to ensure that governments and the industry, with the Hydrogen Council, are working on the key topics to have concrete, real, new and hydrogen trade corridors between exporting countries like UAE in the Middle East or Australia and importing countries, mainly Europe, as mentioned before, by Ivana, or also Korea and Japan. So you see, currently we have really, I would say, concrete international actions to ensure collaboration, but as mentioned before, coordination also.
Fantastic. And I've just had a message in my ear that Mr. Alghafri, we think, has arrived. So if he is here, if he could please come and join us on the stage, please do join us. And perhaps a quick follow-up question to you, Laurent. Hello, Mr. Alghafri. Very nice to see you.
Forgive me.
Lauren, perhaps a super quick follow-up question. Plethora of initiatives out there. How do we make sure they're all aligned with the global 1.5 goal and the minimum of 2-degree goal? Do you have a sense that is front of the agenda on all the different green hydrogen and wider hydrogen initiatives?
I would say yes, we all have in mind how can hydrogen be a significant contributor to achieve this 1.5, even if we all know today that achieving 1.5 is today more than challenging, but we still have to have this ambition to go there. And that's why I would say the hydrogen community is also collaborating with other entities more globally, as mentioned before, during the COP, to see how we can contribute as hydrogen, but also with IEA or IRENA in all their modeling to see how we can bring, I would say, inputs in order to ensure that when we are developing renewable and low hydrogen carbon and hydrogen, how it can really decarbonize globally the economy, in particular by critical, and as you mentioned before, on lead markets, where we really have to start now, and then we can quantify the hydrogen needed, but also what will be the CO2 reduction owing to using this renewable and low carbon hydrogen.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and welcome, Mr. Alghafri.
Thank you so much.
CEO of Emirates Steel. We'll turn to you shortly when we dive into some of the industry things, but I want to turn to Suzanne now. Just perhaps you could give us an introduction to your work on hydrogen, but then particularly what are the key policy interventions and regulations that we need to see at the government level to help unlock those public-private partnerships and the green hydrogen economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and very much a pleasure to be here. I think our conversation here follows on very nicely from the previous conversations which have just taken place, particularly with the Minister and our Masdar colleagues. I think from ADB, the Asian Development Bank point of view, again, I look after the private sector side, but we're an integral part of the overall organization working on upstream on the private side, or the public side, midstream, and then downstream. And so this goes then to the point of why green hydrogen, what are we going to do to actually bring down those barriers? And I think that we've been working very actively to support green hydrogen through various policy instruments with our sovereign colleagues, with our in-country representation, because we have offices in some 44 countries. And it's really important for us to make sure that the policy dialogues align with what can be done so that we can actually attract private investment to hydrogen production, the infrastructure, and I think that the end user applications. And this requires a number of different types of approaches. I was going to name, I had up to 6 different things that you could do. And some of these could be transitionary, some of them could be more permanent. And what we see, I think, in green hydrogen is a little bit of the trajectory that we've seen in solar panels. It's not the same, infrastructure needs and different types of things are different, but I think you have a similar path of adoption and all the necessary parts that need to be put in place, the enabling environment that does need to be put in place. I mean, we can think about tax credits and incentives, and as the Minister said, some of these things are not permanent, but you need to create sustainability through this. I think providing tax credits and other financial incentives can actually diffuse and reduce the initial tax or the burdens for private companies. You need to attract them and create the right environment for this kind of thing. We've done this actually in different national contexts, but you do really need to tailor that to the national context of the various countries, as well as their regulatory environments. They're not all the same. But then that speaks to the point about harmonization. I think that some of the work that needs to be done at a more macro level is how can they work together for pathways to growth in a regional context in particular. So, when we've looked at tax credits, for example, back in 2022, we were looking at a policy base, a sovereign loan to Georgia. And it was a way for Georgia to utilize their surplus electricity on a seasonal basis for surplus that they can then, from their HPPs, to generate hydrogen or synthetic methane for use in other sectors. So we tried to put in a different type of structure. And because hydrogen was a new technology, incentive policies and regulatory inventions were required in order to bring in the private sector. So, I have further details, but, we can talk about that later. But I think that this just speaks down to you need to look at what are the risk factors and how do you mitigate those particular issues. And then I think that within all of this, when you're looking at the public and private sides working together, you can help the government create commercially viable funding models, again, through different types of structures. And then when you're working with the government and the regulators to create financial incentives, but also pricing models that can actually flow through, which can also then focus on affordability for the end users. Feed-in tariffs is another topic that, maybe for a period of time, you can look at fixed fits with a guaranteed fixed price. So you can actually create a platform.
Are any of these like a front runner at the moment? Are you seeing them really?
We're starting to see a lot of this stuff. Again, it's newer in many markets, but we are pursuing a number of green hydrogen investments. And so you're looking at these in different country contexts about what works in that context, and you have some lessons learned that come out of that, and then maybe that can be applied elsewhere. Carbon pricing is another topic which comes up regularly. It's a topic, an area that is continually in evolvement. I think there's different points of view as to that, but I do think that it can make green hydrogen more competitive by increasing the cost of carbon-intensive alternatives. And I think through these different types of models, you need to look at what is the best way of addressing the risks and then making it affordable. I think contracts for difference, provide price stability, for example, for covering the different prices between market price and a predetermined strike price. So again, there is, you need to focus in on these different areas, as I mentioned before, about regulatory environments and standards. I think through that, developing clear and supportive standards and regulatory frameworks are essential. And that's not only within the country, but on a regional basis to make sure that these actually work together. And of course, PPPs, public-private partnerships.
So we've got a sense of global standards, a wide range of regulatory and policy tools. And I think a really important point to note here is, across the low carbon energy transition, we're not asking for anything special for green hydrogen.
No.
These are things which have been deployed in many different contexts, many conventional infrastructure projects, whether it's grid or what have you, offshore wind in Europe and so on. So it's really about tailoring, as you say,
Absolutely.
for the particulars of the individual countries.
Yeah.
If I might turn to Mr. Alshamsi. So with a developer, we were just talking inside about the so-called valley of death, which is a very unfortunate term, but again, common across many different technologies. How do we try and, perhaps you could introduce the work of BEEAH Group, but then talk a little bit about how national policies can really help to address that unpleasant gap between the early stage projects and then actually the mass commercial deployment?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, I represent BEEAH, a pioneering sustainability company based and born out of the Emirate of Sharjah. We originated as a sustainability waste management company to sort of bring the Emirate and city of Sharjah up to global standards when it comes to that sector, right? When we started, we had about 20% of waste being diverted from the landfill. And over the years, we've now achieved 90% landfill diversion rate, which is something we're very proud of. And the way that we've done it is through continuously looking at innovations and what else we could do with that waste. We recycle it, obviously, and then we built the first waste energy plant in the UAE in partnership with Masdar, actually. The Emirates Waste Energy Company is a joint venture with Masdar to bring in that renewable energy expertise into our waste management expertise. And it was through that experience that actually we realized there's more we could do, and there's more that we should do when it comes to sustainability. And we've started diversifying into the energy sector. Coming to hydrogen now, you might be wondering, what does waste have to do with hydrogen? And it's exactly that, is that we're currently working on a hydrogen from waste project in partnership with a UK company, Chinook Hydrogen, to sort of solve this dual problem of waste management that we see across the world, especially in the MENA region. It's quite abysmal in some areas in terms of the management, and at the same time looking to support the energy transition. So when you ask me about the Valley of Death, I think that we as BEEAH have very good experience in that, because we're currently marching through that, right? We've been working on this project actually for over 10 years now with our technology provider, getting it to the stage where we're now nearly ready to get to that final investment decision. And it's through support of policies and government. Again, we were born out of a public-private partnership with the government of Sharjah. And it's through the continual support of government that we're able to really push this through, because again, it's nascent technology. People aren't very confident about it. The hydrogen market, as much as we all talk about it, and we've been talking about it for years, is still up and coming. Yeah. We talk about the need for hydrogen. Everyone talks about the need to get hydrogen to decarbonize their sectors. But, experiencing it as a project developer, we're still at that stage of people saying, well, maybe the hydrogen is too expensive, or we're not sure about the technology. But as we move forward and we progress, we're working very closely with government, and specifically with the Ministry of Energy. It's good to see His Excellency Saeed Alghafri here, who have really been supporting us since day one with this project, in terms of pushing forward the necessary policies, in terms of getting us engaged with the correct stakeholders, and in terms of really listening to the market. My colleagues have spoken about other policies that the EU, the US, and other regions use in terms of tax incentives, in terms of other carrots and sticks. But in the UAE, we very much are a commercially driven government, right? We try as much as possible to be light-handed when it comes to the economy. But what the ministry does well, and what the UAE government does very well, is really listens to the market. They engage very closely with the private sector to understand really the realities on the ground of what we need in terms of creating that ecosystem for allow a project like this to take off.
Could I ask then a specific question? Is there a particular challenge with different, you're bringing together waste and hydrogen, for example, different government departments, different regulatory frameworks? Is that a problem for you? Is that the sort of challenge that you have?
That's not really the challenge we've been facing, really. It's quite clear cut in terms of what we can do with the waste, how we can then generate that into energy. The difficulties are when it comes to speaking the same language with the other stakeholders.
Yeah.
Right? I think one of the big issues that we're facing is that, really we've been seeing a shift starting when the UAE won the bid for COP28. That the country started really taking sustainability seriously, started looking at their own practices and operations in terms of, okay, what is GHG? It's a question as simple as this. A lot of companies don't even measure their own emissions, right? And this is just something that, was seen as an international problem, climate change. We understand the issues, but operationally, day by day, it hasn't really been something that the private sector in the UAE has looked at seriously until COP28. And now we see the shift happening. We see that everyone's starting to take this seriously. We know the direction the UAE wants to go. We have net zero by 2050. We have the national hydrogen roadmap, etc. And I think a key linchpin that's really going to get the market moving in terms of the energy transition, decarbonization, hydrogen uptake, is the Ministry of Climate Change's latest regulation on the National Carbon Registry. So starting this year, all private sectors that have GHG emissions will be mandated to now submit that data to the ministry. May not seem like a big thing when we're talking about, subsidies or we're talking about carbon tax, but actually getting all of these companies to start measuring their own emissions, knowing that at some point there may be a carrot or a stick, really brings people onto the table so that we can start looking at, producing.
It feels critically important, getting stakeholders speaking, as you said, the same language. I previously worked with hydropower and solar, and you have floating solar on hydropower reservoirs, but the problem is the hydropower engineers don't know anything about solar. There's a lack of clarity over who owns the regulator, who has permission to issue things on the water. But once you get people speaking the same language, and perhaps the UAE, like you say, acting as the host for COP, kick-started a discussion in the nation, which is fantastic.
Exactly.
Might just pivot now to Mr. Alghafri. So again, from the commercial perspective, but thinking about those big picture national policies, how do we make sure that, again, if you could please introduce Emirates Steel and your interest in hydrogen, but how can national policies around green hydrogen help the wider economy? Just building on the previous points, please.
So thank you so much for having me here, and my apologies to be late. Forgive me for that. And just to start, it's really a pleasure to be in such a platform. We need to have more of these platforms because one of the main challenges we see around hydrogen and around these new projects is awareness. We need to have that awareness. And someone like us as a manufacturer, our main challenge is the end user. Who are we selling to? And the awareness should be much more stronger. So really, thank you so much for having such events for us to come and talk about hydrogen and what are the latest things that we've been achieving. I represent M Steel, which is a group that focuses on producing steel and building material. And we have an aspiration to be one of the leading or the benchmark when it comes to sustainability aspects. So back in 2019, we did a roadmap to identify what is our footprint before even regulators, before everything. We've been very much innovative when it comes to sustainability. And then we measured how are we compared to the benchmark, specifically when it comes to steel. Now, when we did that, we were ranked among the best in the world, and we were lower by 40% when it comes to the benchmark in terms of the carbon foot and carbon foot intensity. And from there, we draw a complete roadmap on what are we going to do and what are the focus or the pillars that we need to do. So we really focused on diversifying our energy portfolio. So now we use renewable energies in our operation. We have basically today, and previously even back in 2014, we were the first in the world to have a carbon capture facility, and we are the benchmark when it comes to the steel. So everyone in the world comes to Emirates Steel to see that facility because it's the only one which is operating today to capture carbon. And today also what we're doing is we're looking at the value chain and what can we do in terms of recyclable materials. So we re-inject, they call it metallic scrap, which is scrap. We use that in our facilities today. And the last one, which is a little bit difficult, which is the theme of today's event, is the hydrogen. Now, what we did, and everything we did in the past, was based on collaboration. So the carbon capture project was a collaboration between ADNOC at that time, and Masdar, and us, and now it's basically between us and ADNOC. Specifically, since this is a hydrogen event, we are today we are basically testing today a pilot project to produce hydrogen in our company, and that will basically be an alternative material compared to natural gas. And we did that with our colleagues, Masdar and my friend here, Mohammad Abdelqader. He's a very good friend. We're challenging each other a little bit now. But now it's a very small project. We're testing it. And we're going to basically now see what works, what not works. But in terms of initiatives and what needs to be done, when it comes to M Steel as a group, we are really leading the way. We want to be a benchmark when it comes to hydrogen. And we've got the support. Having said all that, when I look around, the UAE has all the ingredients when it comes to driving a hydrogen-based economy. And I see that in the UAE. When I travel to, for example, Europe or anywhere else, I don't see the leadership focus when it comes to that. In the UAE specifically, you see that. You see that from the top, and that's very important. So when you have a new technology or a new project, naturally you're going to have challenges. Any new technologies, that's the same. Hydrogen is no difference. We are in this stage, we need to come together, and that's what we see. So the government is basically the drive. They have the strategy, they have the regulations, and then once you have that there, then you see private investors coming. They will come here, they will come invest, because it becomes very much attractive to put investments, and it will support them.
So you're not seeing the same leadership. That's a really interesting point.
No.
You're not seeing the same leadership. You get a strong sense that the UAE at the government level is out in front here in terms of a cohesive set of national policy targets and frameworks to drive the...
What I love about the UAE is the speed.
Okay.
That's what I love. I do see that, but you see it at a very low place. But the UAE speed is unbelievable. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and it's basically, you need to basically push.
Yeah.
And that's the lovely thing about the UAE. It's the competitiveness and it's the agility that we look at. So having said that, you see that Abu Dhabi is developing to be one of the national champions when it comes to hydrogen technologies. And just look at the national hydrogen strategy that the UAE has. Very much impressive in terms of hydrogen production and how we can basically develop skilled labor when it comes to driving that strategy.
So I have to ask, it's not quite around policy and regulation, but what's the role of the customer here? So are you getting the customer pull? Are there key customers who are saying, we want your products made with green hydrogen?
See, now, again, for me, the customers, even you will be very much having that resistance at the beginning. And that's where we need to bring that awareness. When you have everyone coming under the same national, I would say, guidelines or something like that, everyone will buy in at the end of the day. Now, when you look at steel specifically, or building material, it constitutes a very small component when it comes to construction. So naturally, this is something that you can push into that construction. The only problem is steel is a very hard to abate sector. And the investment that are required to move into that hydrogen is really is immense. What's really important now is just to go there and say, listen, these are incentives. If you use that material, it will give you this much, and that's what we're doing today. We're really coming up with products where it's not only about driving the agenda, but also giving them that very much value when it comes to cost. And eventually, with time, with the regulations, with carbon tax coming, it will give you that competitiveness. And then with time, you'll see that green hydrogen steel is something that everyone is producing naturally. It's like those electrical cars you see on the road now. There are electrical cars everywhere. It's unbelievable.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so we heard about the leadership in the UAE. If I can turn back to Suzanne and Laurent, but perhaps starting with you, Suzanne, the role of government in creating those stable and predictable regulatory frameworks. It sounds like it's working in the UAE. Can you perhaps say some more about outside of this particular region? What do you think some of the steps, because obviously not everybody has the same political context. It might be easier to do certain things in one country than another.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good question because, you know, for the Asian Development Bank, we cover from the Caucasus east to China and south to the Pacific, very different markets and very different countries at different stages. So, but the elements that you need to make this happen are the same. It's, you know, they're all at different stages of development, but I think that first and foremost, clear and consistent policies and transparency is around that, I think, needs to be developed. And particularly around this industry, as you've mentioned, my esteemed panels, you know, it's a nascent industry. So with that, I think that, you know, you need to set specific goals, which includes infrastructure development and end-use applications. So there needs to be, you can't do everything, but I think you need to make some choices as to what that might be. And then with that, the regulatory frameworks that support those initiatives, as far as, you know, again, production, storage, transportation, and utilization, all of those are critical different aspects of the enabling environment that is required. And you need to make it work not only for the government, but then for the private sector. Because as you know, private sector is always risk adverse. So you need to figure out what are the risky aspects and try to find solutions for that. And as part of, you know, these kinds of forums, you need to set international codes and standards. With that, then I think can drive a lot of the more in-country types of situations, in-country approaches. But I think to one of the points raised is data, and the reporting on data will be an important part of that. So you can actually see what the impact of what you're doing is, and then create viable options and opportunities through that. And incentives, financial support, carbon pricing, public PPPs, capacity building. I do think that what we underrate in many of these countries is capacity building. Because if you're going to be putting policies and advise, on what policies to put in place, once, the advisors are gone, you need to help, the government that's there and actually manage that and to continue on with that. So I think that those are really important. All these different critical inputs, they're slightly different. They're very similar, but they're also very different in how they can actually have the impact that they have.
So it's a really interesting point on capacity building, because I think many of us in the policy space assume you just write some policies, you get the companies in showing how the technology works, and it all magically works.
Yeah.
But that's clearly not how it works in practice, or you need to embed that development. Who's best placed to deliver that kind of capacity building? Is it institutions like yours?
Well, multilaterals like ADB do that, yes, but I think that it's such a large job that I think that you have many advisors that do come in for, these different types of aspects. But I think that with that, you need to ensure that there is beyond a very, very thin layer of senior officials who understand those issues, is, the ranks and stuff below that, they can actually do the work and understand what it means or create their own options. So yeah, it does require, a community to come together on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Laurent, similar question to you then. What are the kind of critical role, countries outside the UAE who perhaps haven't quite got that leadership?
Yes, but as has been mentioned, yes, UAE have a very strong strategy and it's moving fast. But that's also the case in other countries. And then I come back to what you said, what is important to have exchanges, but ensuring that people are using the same language, that we understand each other. And that's why we need also, by this multilateral discussion, have this kind of discussion to ensure that when you are using one word, everyone understands the same. And regarding hydrogen, I would say it will be international market. What we are looking is hydrogen to become a commodity. So we need to ensure that national policies have maybe commonalities, or at least that we can ensure comparability. And so having first common language is important, using the same terminology. That's one point. And the second point is, and it has been mentioned by both of you, regarding, for instance, one main element is the carbon content of the hydrogen we are producing and using. That's important for the producers, but also for the user. If you want to produce green steel, you need to know what is the carbon content of your steel. And here also we need to have a comparable, a unique method to measure, to quantify these greenhouse gas emissions. And that's why we've started at IPHE 5 years ago to work on this methodology to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions from production up to usage. But as government, we are not a standardization body. That's why we handed it over to the ISO, which is driven by the industry. And so you see also this is a common work between governments and industry to agree on a common methodology to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions. And this was part also of the COP28 Declaration of Intent, to try to encourage to use these common standards to have at least comparable values if you say I'm using low renewable and low carbon with a given carbon footprint. So this is one important point then and I would say you have a very brilliant project in green steel between Masdar and M Steel, and we were one of the first one applying these ISO standards that we released during COP28 in Dubai. So thank you very much, a very nice example. And then I would say another point that we need also to ensure, we spoke about international trade, but that means we also have to work on trade rules. And ARENA and IPHE, we already have started to discuss with WTO about tax, tariffs, incentives, and not only on the hydrogen molecules or on derivative molecules, but we also need to start discussion on critical equipments. Yeah. Because some countries will be able to produce hydrogen, but don't have available the technology to produce. Yeah. So there will be also, I would say, trade on equipment. And that's why I can only encourage that now, I would say, countries developing hydrogen are pushing to start this kind of discussion at WTO level to ensure that we have a fair trade of molecules and equipment to produce low-carbon hydrogen.
So this is critically important, and just as we begin to wrap up, quickly to Mr. Alshamsi and Mr. Alghafri, you guys building project, you're actually working on the ground. What's the best way for governments for you to work with them to actually evaluate the effectiveness? As you start to build, as you start to develop, how can you work with them? What do they need to be asking you? What types of partnerships need to be in place, regulatory frameworks?
Yep, I guess I'll go first. I think the most important metric a government can use is obviously the uptake of hydrogen. But going farther down that line is also having the metrics of the production of low carbon materials. As my colleague Saeed mentioned, it's that issue of that price, the green premium that the end user is going to have to pay for. But once you reach that stage where the low carbon or near zero version of those end products such as steel, cement, aluminum, once those become the standard, like we're seeing with solar now, UAE recently announced the lowest price per kilowatt hour of solar. Continually, I think every year there's a new announcement. Once we reach that stage where green hydrogen is the preferred energy, and low carbon steel, low carbon cement, zero emission houses are being built, and it's the new standard, that's when we realize that we've really achieved that. And everything in between should be looking at that as the final stage. Exactly.
Absolutely. Mr. Alghafri, final word to you.
Yeah, so I think it's good that we have a strategy, and then we're aligning the national objectives with basically what's happening on the ground. Then you have the private investors coming and investing and all that, so you've got all the players there, which is very good. Then it's good to say, okay, these are the standards, you're following these, and then you start measuring. What are these doing? I mean, it's not going to happen from day one. People will basically not adhere to that, so it's good to have that dialogue happening.
Iterative process.
Exactly. So it's a process. It will take time, naturally. It's like driving any other project. So then you will basically track. Everyone will say, okay, this is how much I'm emitting. This is how much jobs I'm creating, because it's very important to have a skilled labor to do that. And then the technology adoption is very important. So we need to basically ensure that we have the metrics to have that. Now, when you have all that happening, then definitely there are areas where you can see that impact. You can look at the economy, for example, the GDP. How much of that is basically green, hydrogen driven? And then you can look at the total projects in the country, for example, from a development point of view. How much of that is driven by hydrogen? There are stuff that can be that we can look at. And then part of that economy, part of that ecosystem, it's a process again. You need to have bodies where they go there and see how are these companies doing. From an audit point of view, not an auditor, because people don't like an auditor.
Lots of work.
Very much going there and seeing what are they doing, how can they improve, and take the feedback. And then see, and then maybe after 1 year, you sit down with all the parties and then see, okay, maybe this is something we need to change. This is maybe, we like this policy, maybe we need to enhance on that. So it's very much of a continuous improvement process.
I think that's a fantastic point to finish on. So thank you very much. Perhaps we can give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you for joining us as well. Thank you.